Hey everyone, so glad you could join me today. It's Bedtime Stories with me, Emily Richards. But obviously, hey there everybody, it's me, Emily Richards. We're with Bedtime Stories and it's not a bedtime story this afternoon, so you're tuning in to cooking. So we're not doing a bedtime story, but we are going to be cooking, and we're going to be doing some cooking. Maybe you're planning for Mother's Day and what you want to bake for mom or with mom. So it's nice, simple, easy recipes that you can make on your own if you want, or if you want to get the kids involved. Maybe they can make them as well. So I thought we'd do a little sweet and savory, although the biscuits can go either way. You can make them sweet or savory. And I'm also just going to set up my little tablet here so that if I need to, I can answer some questions as we go along. So just give me a minute and I will set that up as well so that if anyone has questions, I'll be able to answer. So for those of you that have been keeping track and enjoying the bedtime stories, you will know that it's different authors, there's been musicians, sharing bedtime stories at 8 o'clock. So for the rest of the week at 8 o'clock, you can tune into that and catch your favorite or maybe new favorite bedtime story. I am a cookbook author, so I'm also an author, but I don't write bedtime stories. I write different types of stories. I write stories with food, and they are recipes, so easy enough to make anytime. So we're going to start off with some biscuits, and I'm just going to get this going, which I think I have it, or maybe I don't. We'll see. Maybe not. No, it won't work for me right now, but that's okay. We'll come back to it. All right. So if you do have questions and I can't see the questions because it's a little bit far away from me, don't worry, your questions will get answered. But we are going to get started off with some biscuits. So these are, a lot of people refer to them as tea biscuits, and they're different from scones. Scones are just as delicious, but typically they have an egg in them. So these biscuits don't have any eggs. They do have leavener. We're using baking powder, so that's what gives them that nice fluffy texture. And the height, which we definitely want because they're showstoppers if we want to share them with mom, which is important. So I'm going to start off with some all-purpose flour. And if you want the recipes, we did post them on Bedtime Stories. So if you're not making them today, you can make them later and just follow the recipes. But I'm following them exactly. And we're starting off with some all-purpose flour. Okay. So I have 1 cup in our bowl already, but I'm going to add another 1.5 cups because it's in total 2.5 cups. So I'm just using all-purpose flour, and I'm scooping in my flour into my dry measuring cup, and I can overfill it and then just level it off, okay, and then put it in the bowl. I'm not tapping it. I'm not doing anything to add more flour to it because I do want these nice and fluffy, and then I'm going to add another 1/2 cup of flour. So if you need to make these gluten-free, I have made them with gluten-free flour and they work really, really well. So you could definitely do that. If you want to do a mixture of whole wheat and all-purpose flour, you can do that as well. So whatever you have at home. You could also use spelt flour or barley flour. A little bit richer flours, but they absolutely work and they have a great flavor. All right, so our flour's in the bowl. We're going to add a little bit of sweetness to this. We're going to add some granulated sugar. Okay, so the reason why we're adding sugar, whether it's for savory biscuits or sweet, is because we want them to get that nice little golden brown color on top, which is really, really important. So just 2 tablespoons. It's not overly sweet. If you're looking for a really sweet biscuit, you can double up on that sugar and add a 1/4 cup or 4 tablespoons. Then I'm going to add a tablespoon of baking powder. So this is really what's going to help give us that height of the biscuit, which is delicious, and then some salt because we want to balance out the other flavors that we're going to add. Okay. What I love about these types of recipes is that you actually are getting your hands involved. They're getting into the flour mixture, and we will be making the biscuits by hand. Okay. So I'm just stirring that up together so that my baking powder, sugar, and salt get all mixed together. And then I'm going to add my butter. So here's where, if you don't have butter, You could use a shortening, so you could use vegetable shortening if you wanted to. You could also use lard. You could use leftover bacon fat if you have it, make them absolutely delicious. But I am going to use butter. So you need 3/4 cup of butter, and I've already cut it up into little cubes, little pieces. Now, if your butter is really, really cold, you can cut it in one big chunk and then grate it so that it's nice and small. It might be easier, especially if you're having help in the kitchen. For smaller hands, they can grate that butter right into the flour mixture. All right, now you have a choice. You can continue with your hands, or you can use a pastry blender. So this is a pastry blender. For those of you that make pastry all the time, you've probably used it often. And what you do is actually put this right into the flour and the butter mixture and just break up the butter. So it'll kind of stick into the pastry blender like that. You want to push it through as we work. If you don't have a pastry blender, don't worry. You can use your hands. And this is where it gets a little bit more fun, especially if you have help in the kitchen. Smaller hands like to get in and break up the butter just like this. So what I'm doing is basically rubbing the butter through the flour just to break it up into smaller pieces. So oftentimes when you see recipes, they say into pea-sized pieces or look like oats or small breadcrumbs. That's exactly what you're looking for, okay? So just breaking it up and rubbing it so that the flour and the butter are absorbed together, okay? So this takes a little bit of time. If your butter's really, really cold right out of the refrigerator, it will take a little more time. So you definitely want to work at your leisure if you can. If it's at room temperature, it'll happen a little bit quicker, okay? So just take your time. You don't have to rush this process. If you're using the pastry blender, it will take a little bit longer, okay? So I will show you what it looks like. I wanted to do this part because this is the process that you would use for any type of pastry, not just biscuits or scones, but if you're making pie pastry, you would do the same thing. And it's a common recipe statement in this type of method, okay? So I'm glad to see that there's a few of you joining us, and I don't know if you're making the biscuits or not right now with us, but if you're not, this is definitely a recipe you want to keep on hand because this type of biscuit is great for soups. It's great alongside a stew, although the weather's warming up, so I don't know how many stews we're going to be having. Or you could serve it up for breakfast. If it's a nice plain biscuit, you could put some eggs and cheese in it and have it for a breakfast biscuit. Or you could just have it in the afternoon with tea. That's a nice special time to have, quiet time. All right, so we're coming along really well here. And what I'm doing is it clumps together. So if you can see that, I know that the butter's getting absorbed into the flour, which is great. And I'm rubbing my hands through here to make sure that there's no large lumps of butter, okay? There. Now here's where the first decision is, are you gonna make the biscuits? The next decision is, are you gonna make them sweet or savory? So I'm gonna make them savory this afternoon and use some old cheddar. So this is about 1/2 cup of old cheddar cheese that I've shredded. You could use any of your favorite cheese. The stronger the cheese, the more flavor your biscuits will have. So if you're using blue cheese, they'll be nice and potent. An aged cheddar, Asiago would be great in here. You can even use some Parmesan cheese. That would be delicious. And then I'm just gonna toss this all together in my mixture. Now, if I wasn't making savory and I wanted to make sweet, I would use some dried fruit. So I pulled out some examples here. I have some nice dried cranberries that you could use or some currants. Either of these would work absolutely beautifully. If you wanted to use fresh fruit, you have to be a little bit more gentler, but blueberries, chopped strawberries, even some rhubarb in here would be delightful, okay? So I'm switching over to my fork and I'm gonna start to drizzle in my milk. So I've called for 1 cup of milk. This could be whatever milk you have. If it's a soy beverage or anything like that, you can use. I like them with cream. They're a little extra rich, which is nice. And then I'm gonna start to toss it with my fork to make sure that the flour mixture gets coated nicely, okay? So keep drizzling in that milk. Don't put it in all at once because you may not need all of that cup of milk. Depends on your flour, depends on what else you're adding to it. okay? And sometimes it even depends on what day it is. So if it's extra humid, you might need less, just because the flour is absorbing it differently. So if you see any dry spots where the flour is a little bit more crumbly, you can go in and just add a little bit more milk to coat it. And I think it's clumping up beautifully for me here. So I'm gonna wipe off my fork, and then I'm actually just gonna gather the dough in the bowl with my hands. And that's a sign of how you'll know that you have enough milk in it. The dough should come together, okay? And you don't have to be too gentle here. You can just kind of gather it up easily. Make sure that you have some of the crumbly bits of the biscuit sticking to the dough. There we go. Just like that. Okay, so there's nothing really left in the bowl. I'm going to get those last few little bits of cheese because we don't want to miss out on those. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a little bit of my flour on my counter and I'm going to knead the dough just a few times. Okay, and I'm just turning it a quarter turn each time. And this is just to ensure that I get some nice layers in my biscuits, just like that. Okay, so maybe about 10 times is really the amount of time that you have to knead it, and it'll look nice and smooth. Then I'm going to put a little bit more flour, and now we're going to pat it out. Okay, so I've given you an estimated size of about a 10-inch square. Was it a 10-inch square? Maybe? No, it's not going to be 10 inch. It's going to be 1 inch thick. That's most important. Okay, we'll measure it and I'll give you the diameters if I get that. But what's most important is that 1 inch thickness, because we want these to be nice and fluffy. Now, why a square, are you asking? Because I don't want to use a biscuit cutter, because then I have to gather the dough and rework it, which actually toughens the biscuits a little bit. So by using a square or a rectangle, I can actually cut them into squares or rectangles and I don't have to rework the dough again. So it's actually a nice little way to get fluffy biscuits. Now, if you want, you could definitely use a biscuit cutter. So if you want them round or if you want them in a heart shape for mom, you definitely can do that. Okay, or you can make a circle and cut them into triangles, which is traditional of scones, but you could definitely do it with the biscuit dough as well. All right, so how am I going to know that this is an inch? Well, you can estimate, or you can use a ruler. I have my kitchen ruler, so you just want to hold it up against your dough and see if it's about an inch high. Okay, and if it's not an inch high, that's okay. The only difference will be that they won't puff up quite as much. Okay, so this is now 1 inch, and let's see, it is about a 6.5 square, 7.5. So depending on how you're patting it out. All right, so this is where I'm going to cut them. So I'm doing 12 because it's easily divisible. So I'm going to do 4 this way. You could also do 9 if you wanted to. Okay, and then I'm going to do 3 cuts to get 3 biscuits this way. All right, and then I have my baking sheet here with some parchment paper. You could use Silpat if you wanted to. And then I'm just going to put them right onto my baking sheet. Now, if you wanted these a little bit softer, so a soft-sided biscuit, what you could do is actually keep them close together so that as they're cooking in the oven, they'll stay nice and soft on the side. I like mine with a little bit of crispness on them, so I'm going to leave a little bit of space in between them, okay? Just like that. Now, on top, you're gonna have a little bit of milk left in that measuring cup, so just take a little pastry brush and brush it over top. That'll give us a nice little glaze. And if you don't have any more milk left because you've used it all, that's okay. You can just add another splash and then just brush it on top. Now, if you wanted to, you could sprinkle the top with a little bit of sesame seeds or poppy seeds. You could put a little bit more cheese on top if you wanted to. That would make them extra special too. So I'm gonna pop these in the oven and then I'm gonna be right back. Don't forget to put a timer on to check them. And I don't want you to go anywhere because we're gonna make something else while those are baking, okay? But I am gonna clean up a little bit. And what I love about biscuits is that they come together so quickly that you could make them for a weeknight meal. to include, as I said, with a soup or a stew, or even just on their own. But we're also going to make a little egg pizza, which I think is really fun because it comes together really quick. It's a great breakfast idea, quick lunch idea, and you can make it your own, which is always fun. So how am I going to clean up this mess? If you don't have a bench scraper, this is very, very handy to just gather up all your bits and clean up your counter, which is really, really easy to do. There we go. And then I'm going to give my hands a wash as we move on to the egg pizza. Now, I love doing these live classes, if you will, because we're going through the process as you probably would be at home. The only downside is you can't smell. As if we were doing a real cooking class, you can't smell what's happening in the oven. So I promise you, I'll share with you how amazing it smells. All right, so I'm just gonna wipe down my counter and move the ingredients over for our egg pizza. So I'm gonna use my cooktop, and then I have my other ingredients here for the egg pizza. So I'm hoping that most of you have eggs at home, which makes this super, super quick and easy. And you can make one per person. You can make a larger one and share it 4 or 6 or however many you need. But I'm making it for one. So I'm using a nice little skillet. And I'm using a nonstick skillet because that makes it so much easier to get the egg pizza out of the pan. All right, so a couple of eggs. These are large eggs. Guess what? If I could, well, I'll see if you know the answer. I'm gonna look. I'm gonna scroll up here and see. I'm gonna ask the question and see if anyone knows the answer. What is the difference between a white egg and a brown egg? Put your thinking cap on. I'll tell you the answer so you don't have to worry. There is no difference other than the color of the shell. White chickens tend to lay white eggs and brown chickens tend to lay brown eggs. Now, oftentimes when you go to the grocery store, you see that the brown eggs might cost a little bit more, and here's why. The brown chickens are a little bit larger than the white chickens, so they tend to cost more because it costs more to feed them. So I have white eggs right now in the refrigerator, but nutritionally they're exactly the same, so not to worry. It's going to be a great little egg pizza. So I'm going to crack my eggs, and usually when I'm baking, we didn't use eggs in the biscuits because we didn't make scones. But I like to keep everything at room temperature so that when it comes together, you saw how quickly the biscuit dough came together. Having eggs at room temperature when you're baking is a huge help. All right, so I'm going to just use a fork. You can use a whisk if you wanted to. Beat up our eggs. And then I'm going to add a little seasoning, and this is totally optional. If you or mom or the kids aren't fans of seasoning the eggs, you can leave it out completely. But I'm going to add a little pizza seasoning. So I'm going to use some dried oregano and get that in there, and some salt. Okay, so that's all going to go in. You could use dried basil. You could use some Italian seasoning. If you want to spice it up, you could add a pinch of cayenne in here, which would be absolutely delicious. Okay, and then I also want to heat up my pan a little bit. So if you have cooking spray, you can give your pan a little spray before you get started and heat it up. I'm just going to use a little bit of canola oil in here. And the reason why I'm using canola oil is just a neutral oil, so it's not going to offer up any flavor. But you use whatever oil you have at home. We really just want to help get the pan warm and then have the egg not stick. So if you have an older nonstick skillet with lots of cuts in it, might not be the one you want to use. Just because the egg tends to stick in those little crevices. All right, so that's all ready to go. But let's talk about this pizza element to it. So there's no pizza dough. I'm sure you've noticed. This is the pizza dough is our egg. That's going to be the base of our pizza. And then we're going to use pizza toppings. So this is where you can add whatever you have in the refrigerator or whatever favorite pizza toppings that you like to eat. So I'm going to use pepperoni and cheese. Very, very simple, very basic. But I'm also you can use either pizza sauce or pasta sauce as the flavor of the pizza, okay? So we want this, yeah, it's nice and warm. So we're going to pour our eggs into our pan, just like that, okay? And it's gonna start to cook. everything tends to cook from the outside in, eggs included. So I'm not going to go in there and start stirring it around because I actually want this to be nice and flat. Eggs also cook very, very quickly. So that's what makes them a great breakfast, lunch, or snack if you're really hungry in the afternoon. So what I'm going to do is, you have a few options here. You can actually take some of the sauce and drizzle it on top. So let's do that. But you can also just use the sauce later, okay, and top it. So I'm going to just drop some sauce right in there. Now, if you don't have pizza or pasta sauce, this could be a little bit of salsa. So you can change it up and do a Mexican style pizza. Then I'm going to put some pepperoni slices on, okay? And again, depending on what size your pepperoni is, you might need a few extra slices or you might need a few less. And then I'm going to use some mozzarella cheese. Put that right on top. You could put your favorite veggies on here, some green pepper or a little bit of mushrooms. You can make it as cheesy as you want. And then you're going to cover it. So why am I covering it? So that I don't have to flip it. It's going to cook all the way through and essentially steam the top and melt the cheese, which is really important. So you don't want to do this over too high of a heat because you don't want the bottom to cook too quickly before the top is cooked. So this actually produces a really nice, light, fluffy texture to the eggs and to the pizza itself. I'm just going to move this over because I have a plate ready that I want to turn my egg pizza out onto. So this is something that you could start in the morning, and let's say there's 5 or 6 of you at home. You can make one for everybody with their own toppings that they want. And you can just make them all and then warm them up on a baking sheet in the oven. So it doesn't have to be last minute as we're doing now. It can just be as a make ahead, and then we'll pop them in the oven. Okay. Now I have to tell you a little secret. I knew that the biscuits weren't going to be ready before we were done. So I made another pan. And you can make multiple pans of biscuits. The great thing is once they're baked and cooled, you can freeze them so that you always have biscuits in the oven. So you can pull them out and warm them up in the oven again so that they're fresh out of the oven, but you didn't have to make them right away. Okay. So I'm just taking a peek here at my egg to make sure that it's still loose around the pan because I want it to slide out. Okay. And what you're looking for, this just needs another 30 seconds. What you're looking for is the egg to be nice and puffed and golden, and in the center that it's not wet in the middle. So there's a few ways you can do that. You can visually see it so it doesn't look shaky in the center of the egg. Or you can actually take a little paring knife and just put it in the center and pull it out to see that the egg comes out not creamy, it's nice and clean. Okay, I'm going to turn that off and I'm going to slide out our egg pizza. Okay, see if it'll come out without fail. Let's see, I may have put too much pizza omelet by folding it over. There we go. Flip that back over, and our pepperoni. There, so there's our egg pizza. Now, of course, as you just saw, if you flip it over, it's instantly an omelet, so that's not a bad option either, okay? So there's our egg pizza. I hear the timer, I'm gonna check our biscuits, but I do have some that I made ahead, so I can show you how lovely they look when they're nice and tall out of the oven. So I'm just gonna check these. Oh, I will show you these. They're not quite done yet, but look at how beautiful they look. Okay, they're just a light golden. I don't know if you can see how nice and big they popped out, but I'm going to put these back in to finish them, like so. I'm going to show you the ones I made earlier that have already cooled, so I don't have to worry about how hot they are. But they have all these lovely layers in them, and they have that nice golden brown color that are perfect to enjoy with a little bit of butter, warm butter, room temperature butter to spread on top. You could serve them with some of your favorite jams, some cream, or that's the sweet part, or you could serve them, as I said, for breakfast and use them as an egg sandwich. So you could put an egg, some bacon, sausage, and cheese in there, and make mom a great breakfast or afternoon tea. So there's lots of options when it comes to biscuits. And like I said, if you need to make some as a trial run, make them this week so that you're ready for Mother's Day. And the egg pizza is super, super easy too, that you can make it for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. So if you just need a little pick-me-up, the egg pizza is the way to go. Thank you so much for joining me on Bedtime Stories. And I know we didn't read a story this time, but hopefully you'll read the recipes and be able to make them at home. If you have any questions, just post them in the comments and I'll go back and try to help you out as best I can. And stay tuned for the rest of the week because there's some great bedtime stories happening this week. And I hope you have a great Monday and the rest of the week. Thanks for joining me.